When you say Wisconsin, you've said it all.
I would like to address a certain stereotype that my home state has had to deal with. Now, I was born and raised in the great state of Wisconsin, where I currently live. And when some people think of Wisconsin, one thing that may come to mind is that Wisconsin is full of drunk people. I am here to tell you right now that is just a bunch of... Oh. Okay, I'll admit it. I don't drink myself, but yeah, I'll say it straight up. Wisconsin may have a drinking problem. We've got more than twice as many bars as grocery stores, we've got over 230 breweries statewide, we have a store called Drink Wisconsinbly, and our Major League Baseball team is literally called the Milwaukee Brewers. Yeah, I don't think we're beating the alcohol allegations anytime soon. But I'm an arcade buff, and at some point recently, a weird question popped into my head. What is the most Wisconsin arcade game ever made? Well, arcade games and bars are old bedfellows. I mean, before dedicated arcades existed, bars were one of the early places to find coin-op games. Hell, the prototype for Pong was literally installed in a bar. But there's a game that was literally made for bars, about bars. Tapper, a game made in the Midwest, sponsored in the Midwest, and if old arcade games were made in Wisconsin, this could have easily been one of them. So have a seat at the bar. It may be BYOB, but the arcade history is on the house. So from the title screen, you can see that Tapper was published by Midway Games, or Bally Midway at the time. And seeing that they were based in Chicago, that's already Midwest by default, and probably the closest that arcade game development came to the Badger State. However, the actual development was handled by a company called Marvin Glass & Associates, MGA for short, also based in Chicago. The interesting thing was, MGA was primarily a toy company. Originally founded in 1941 by Marvin Glass, MGA was responsible for developing some of the most successful toys of the 20th century. Mr. Machine, Light Bright, Mousetrap, Rock'em Sock'em Robots, Operation, Simon. These were just a few of the toys and games developed by this company and licensed to various distributors. And during the 80s, they had a deal going with Bally Midway to develop arcade games. For one of these games, artist Scott Morrison pitched the idea of a game that took place in a bar where you played as a bartender. He drew up a few storyboards and sent them to Bally Midway for the pitch. Needless to say, they were interested. So Bally Midway's head of licensing, Tom Neiman, reached out to Budweiser. Yeah, they made a deal with Anheuser-Busch to license the game for distribution in bars across the country. That's right, this was a game specifically designed for bars instead of arcades, so they figured that teaming up with the King of Beers was the way to go.
So does this mean I have to rename this episode QG at the Barcade?
Heck, even the cabinet for the game was designed with bargoers in mind. The handles for the early versions of the game were based on actual Budweiser beer tap handles, before switching to smaller plastic handles with Budweiser's branding. There was also a drink holder on the side of the cabinet, and even a brass rail for a footrest, assuming of course you were sitting in a chair. The game was programmed by Steve Meyer and Elaine Hodgson, and Rick Hicaro composed the music. Tapper was developed for Bally Midway's MCR3 arcade board and released in bars in February of 1984. So let's pop a quarter in the slot and start this baby up! Okay, here's the sitch. You're playing as a bartender and you got a buttload of thirsty customers looking for a drink because in case you didn't notice... And as a bartender, the last thing you want is for your customers to be unsatisfied. Because if they reach the end of the bar without a drink, they'll grab you by the lapels of your coat and drag you out on your butt. And you lose a life. This is supposed to be happy hour, not angry hour. So in order to serve customers, you've got the beer tap handle. When you pull it, you start filling up a mug from the tap you're currently standing at. Once the mug is full, you let go, and you'll send the mug sliding on the bar and into the hand of your waiting customer, who will slide back a ways and hopefully out the door sated and satisfied. At least there had better be a waiting customer, or else the mug will fall off the bar and shatter, leaving a mess of beer and glass. And you lose a life. If the customer is too far along, they'll just chug their mug and then send it sliding back to you, and you need to catch it so that it can be washed for the next customer. But if you miss, the empty mug will crash, leaving just a mess of glass. And you lose a life.
Rule of 3, my friends!
Of course it would be too easy if there were only one bar, right? Yeah, there's actually 4 of them, so you have a standard joystick for movement. Up and down move you directly to the tap of the adjacent bar, so you can serve the next customer right away. Left and right let you run up and down the bar to retrieve not only empty mugs, but the occasional tip left by a customer. Grab one of those and not only will you get a bonus, but you'll trigger a show on the back which will distract some of your patrons and give you a chance to get your bearings again. Keyword meaning some, since not everyone is interested in old-time dancing ladies. And the ones who are distracted, don't try serving them when their backs are turned. The object of each level is to make sure all the customers leave happy, at which point your bartender will pour a drink for himself and try to do a quick trick with the mug, with various funny results. Of course you gotta be quick, because if you take too long, new customers will show up to a maximum of 4 per bar. Thirst never rests, bold bartender. A dry throat is an angry throat, and patience is lacking in the parched. There are 4 scenes with their own look. 2 rounds at a normal saloon, 3 rounds at a sports bar, 4 rounds at a punk bar, and 4 rounds in space. After every scene, there's a bonus round where a bandit triggers a shell game, but with shaking beer cans instead. Refreshing. So, what made Tapper work as a game? Let's start with why the gameplay loop worked. I never went to bartending school, but I would imagine that this game captures how stressful a bar full of demanding and thirsty customers can be. This is a game that requires not only sharp reflexes, but also constant awareness. You need to keep on top of things because there's quite a bit to keep track of. You not only need to keep an eye on the customers, but also keep tabs on the empty mugs coming back toward you. And you also need to make sure you actually have time to grab the occasional tip. And even when the dancing girls are out, you can't take your eyes off the bars. You need to be aware of who's watching the show and who's still coming for a drink. While the patrons are paying money, you gotta be paying attention or else you'll be paying in a less desirable way. It's a tense but exciting gameplay loop. Next, let's talk about the presentation, because that contributes a lot to the experience. Let's get the obvious out of the way right now. Since Budweiser sponsored this game, it should come to the surprise of literally 0 people that their branding is all over this game. You got their logos in the background, on the mugs. Hell, the music that plays when the dancing girls are out is the old "This Bud's For You" jingle.
If you were alive when that jingle was on TV, you qualify for the senior discount.
As for the stages, the variety of themes make this game look vibrant. Each stage is colorful and interesting, and the cartoony art style of the patrons give this game a silly and comical look. The simple animations are also very expressive, and that includes those of the bartender himself, whose appearance was based on Mike Ferris, an artist who was one of Scott Morrison's mentors. And as for the sound and music, Hikaru created them using a Synclavier 2 synthesizer, using custom software written by Richard Ditton. The backing music includes not only original songs, but also some familiar tunes, including "Oh Susanna" in the Standard Saloon, and "Buffalo Gals" in the Sports Bar. The sound effects were fitting to the style as well, and everything just clicked in that special kind of way. Tapper was a huge success in multiple territories. In the US, it brought in a lot of sales in bars across the country. Meanwhile, in Japan, it was the most successful table arcade unit in March of 1984. But it wasn't without its share of controversy, and it's not too hard to see why. The game was literally licensed by a beer company, and considering how hard it is to restrict a game to bars, that could be a problem. Specifically, parents were worried that the game was advertising alcohol to minors, and that isn't exactly the kind of message you want to be sending. So in order to get this game into arcades without issue, they had to come up with a noticeable solution. The solution they came up with was to create a reskinned version called Root Beer Tapper, removing all references to Budweiser and dressing up the bartender as an old-fashioned soda jerk. The logo in the saloon was replaced by a root beer on tap sign, the logo was scrubbed from the mugs entirely, the word bar in the window was replaced by soda, the "This Bud's For You" message in the bonus round was changed to "This One's For You," and other similar graphical changes were made throughout this version. Some of the music was changed as well. For example, the tune that plays when you start a game or clear a level is completely different, as is the bit that plays during the bonus round while the cans are shuffling. Also, the "This Bud's For You" theme that normally plays for the dancing girls is replaced by "Galop Infernal" from Jacques Offenbach's Orpheus in the Underworld. What's that? Never heard of it? Well, maybe if I...
Can, kick a little, can, tell me who's the man.
So yeah, this version was 100% arcade safe. Well, given how much sugar is in a mug of root beer, maybe it's more like 70% safe-ish. There's also a version with the label of the Japanese beer Suntory. However, Sega, who distributed Tapper in Japan, denies the existence of this version, so the possibility exists that this version is just a ROM hack. And for more modern times, a reboot called Tapper World Tour was released for iOS and only iOS in 2011, developed by Square One Studios and published by WB. Freaking iOS exclusivity ruins everything!
Yes, I have an Android phone. Quiet down.
Oh, by the way, this isn't our overstressed bartender's first rodeo. Super arcade buffs may notice that this character looks awfully similar to the character from a previous game from Midway that was also developed by MGA. This game was called Domino Man, released in 1983 using Midway's MCR2 system. In this game, your objective is to place dominoes on all the black dots in the level. Meanwhile, you gotta shove pedestrians away from your stack, smack bees with a domino, stun the big-ass bully, and avoid the invincible walking clock. If one of the dominoes is disturbed, you gotta remove one of the dominoes on the stack before it reaches the domino on the left, because if that one falls prematurely, or you get stung, you lose a life. Once you complete a level, you can either topple the stack to bank the points based on the multiplier, or you can risk the extra points on another level to multiply the bonus. But be warned, if you try this and lose a life, your bonus multiplier goes back down to 100 points a domino. After every few levels, you have a humorous little cutscene, not unlike some other games at the time. As for the music, you may recognize it. It's the Maple Leaf Rag by Scott Joplin, the song that earned him his reputation as the King of Ragtime. And as a nice little touch when you get a game over, the game evaluates your performance with a clever verse. Like Tapper after it, Domino Man takes a simple premise and throws a few challenges into the mix. It's an interesting game, though it would be ultimately eclipsed by Tapper. Still, it's an interesting bit of trivia. And Tapper wouldn't be his last rodeo either. That's because in October of 1984, Bally Midway would release Timber, another game developed by MGA on the MCR2 board. As it turns out, on the weekends, our bartender has a side job as a lumberjack, and he's okay. This game is a twin stick affair, with one stick for movement, and the other one letting you swing your axe either left or right. You've got a quota, you've got a time limit, and you've got a bunch of stuff to get in your way. You've got bears throwing beehives at you, which you gotta either dodge or smack with your axe. You've also got the occasional bird which falls out of a tree, which you can catch for points. By the way, you've also got to make sure you don't let those trees fall on you. And after every few levels, you've got a bonus round where you gotta stay on top of a rolling log. Harder than it looks, not gonna lie. Oh, and they made sure to let you know that this is a multiplayer game. Another player can join for either a cooperative or competitive round. They spell it out in flashing letters multiple times during the attract mode. In a two-player game, you can push a tree onto the other player for a score bonus, and the player who finishes the round having chopped more trees gets a bonus. Now, the music is catchy, but I don't seem to recognize it from anywhere. But the sprite work is definitely on point here. Unfortunately, this game didn't necessarily do all too well. Not sure why. Fun fact! All the cabinets that hosted this game were either Tapper or Root Beer Tapper originally. Well, better that than junk, best to reuse what you can after all. Of course, I'm not sure how many bars still have a Tapper cabinet. More than likely, if it's in a bar, that bar is probably a barcade. But you might not know that Tapper has something of a spiritual successor in bars in some arcades. Yeah, did you think that indie games were just for consoles and PC? Please! You see, there's an indie arcade developer called DSM Arcade out in Des Moines, Iowa. Again, in the Midwest. Back in 2019, they developed an arcade port of a game called Switch and Shoot, a one-button shmup originally made for consoles and PC by solo dev Matt Glanville. Then, in 2022, they partnered with Messhoff to port Needhog 2 to the arcade. But most recently, in 2024, they partnered with Matt Glanville again, this time for their first original game, Perfect Pour. Similar to Tapper, you play as a bartender who has to serve plenty of waiting customers. What makes this different is that the controls are just 4 tap controllers, and you have to hold the right tap just long enough to fill it to the right height. And don't take too long! During your shift, there's twists like pitchers, blown kegs, half pours, and perfectionist customers to really test your attention, as well as bosses and minigames and a variety of environments. There's also plenty of customization for arcade operators, like the ability to customize the taps and logos in the game, a family-friendly soda pop mode option, and even removable drink stands, because of course this was also made with bars in consideration. And there was recently a version of the game made with licensing from Pabst Blue Ribbon, a famous beer brand that was established in Milwaukee.
Oh, snaps.
Damn, this game's about just as Midwest as Tapper was. Hell, Perfect Pour actually won an award for Best Single-Player Game at last year's Midwest Gaming Classic. Man, I never expected to have this much to say about games concerning beer of all things. But there is a lot of careers you can make games about. I mean, nowadays we have career simulator games up the wazoo. But Tapper worked as a game thanks to its cartoony graphics, fun presentation, and addictive gameplay loop that kept players on their toes. It's not the kind of game you'd be good at if you were drunk, but it fits in bars perfectly, and the root beer reskin gave it a chance in arcades, which is definitely a good thing. And not only did the bartender have a cameo in Wreck-It Ralph after all, but the fact that indie devs made a spiritual successor with Perfect Pour is proof enough that if you make a game for the right audience, they'll show up. Tips and all.
And if you want to play the game yourself, Root Beer Tapper is in a few compilations as recent as the PS3, if you don't want to bother with an emulator. That way you can experience the tension of being a bartender without needing a designated driver to get home. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna get myself a drink.
Hey there everyone, QG here. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, hype, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check me out on Blue Sky and my live streams on Twitch. If you want to help my channel out, you can become a channel member or support me on Patreon. And don't forget about my campaign to support the Trevor Project. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.